is not just what we're going to learn, which I expect we're going to learn an awful lot, and I would also expect that we're probably not all going to agree upon what we've learned, but that a couple of ladies, sadly neither one who can be here tonight, but Ann Derwin and Sandy Kemp, who kind of got this bug up their bottoms and decided that they were very interested in this issue, and they got together. They had not had any experience before in getting folks rallied in any way, communicating with the media or anything along those lines, and in fact they alone did all of this, and conveniently one had unfortunately a death in the family, and another one got the flu, and now you guys got me. So that's the result of the flu and death. So I'm not so sure it's a great entree for myself. I'm not going to try to make this quickly here. We've got...
Who are you, Jim?
Oh, I'm the guy on my video, but I'm retired. I've been in Muskegon County for about 40 years, and I've been 30-some years in the financial world, and I am now a radio talk show host on Eye on Muskegon every Sunday morning from 8:30 to 10, and we're on the internet at Eye on Muskegon, and we do lots of other radio stuff. But tonight we've got really, actually we had one of our speakers tonight was on my show last weekend, and you can listen to that show afterwards if you're so inclined if you go to eyeonmuskegon.com. But Dave Sheldon, and I thought that I had a little history here, so I'm just going to introduce him shortly, and I'll let him tell you who he is. But he's a tremendously knowledgeable guy. He's got incredible history when it comes to the science of the smart meter issue. Diana Osterman, also 22-year employee of Lucent Technologies in their wireless division. And hidden back undercover someplace, we've got two gentlemen from Consumers Power, Consumers Energy.
Hi, Dennis McKee.
Dennis McKee. Good evening. And we're going to have you up here at some point. And thank you so much for attending. We hope that it'll be a horribly hostile crowd and make it much more interesting for Dave Alexander over there. And I would just like to say that we will take a break, and we're going to pass around a box that hopefully will be filled with money, because these two ladies, both retired women, that decided to put this on, had to rent the room, had to pay some other significant costs, and if we could defray those a little bit, that would be nice. And if in fact we are able to fully defray those, we're going to compensate the two speakers here that we have tonight. So if you can, contribute a little bit, and we'll get somebody else to count it. And even though I had 27 years of losing people's money in the financial world. So beyond that, I'm going to introduce Dave Sheldon. And David, take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, I am the head of Michigan Stop Smart Meters. It's a Detroit-based group, and we are the ones that put the program together. So Ann Derwin here is the one that made all of the arrangements for the room and the local publicity and everything of that nature. And we certainly thank Ann for that. Now, what we're going to do, just kind of the agenda for the evening. I'm going to... Yes, sir.
Could you speak up, please?
I'm sorry. I'll get to the microphone.
We are experts on technology here, right?
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for telling me.
Can't see you.
I will repeat, I represent Michigan Stop Smart Meters. We are a Detroit-based organization. We put together the presentations that you're going to see tonight. And I will be speaking, and Diana will be speaking. The agenda kind of for the evening is I will give an introductory PowerPoint presentation on what smart meters are all about and why they're controversial. Then Diana will go, and she's going to get much more in depth about the exposure to electromagnetic energy based on her own background with Lucent Technologies and so on. And then we'll have a brief intermission. It'll be just about 10 minutes. And then we'll take it up again. And right after the intermission, I'm going to give the talk about privacy. After that, I'll talk about what we're doing to combat all this, politically speaking, and in the courts and before the Public Service Commission. And then we'll have a question and answer. I hope we can save out about the last half hour for questions and answers. Let me just get an idea, a couple of things, if I may. How many of you are from the city of Muskegon here? at least half of you. And are some of you from Oceana County? Yeah? Anyone from Ottawa County? I'm covering quite an area here. How many of you already have a smart meter on your house? A lot of you. Okay. How many of you heard quite a bit about smart meters before and had already decided not to get one? Okay, you guys are informed.
How many people have been arrested?
How many what?
How many people have been arrested for not letting them put them on?
Okay, we'll get there later. Okay, let me get started with the presentation. We'll do the overview. And let's see. Okay, first of all, so we all have a point of reference. What is an analog meter? The traditional meter looks like this. You can all see it on the screen, right? Has everybody got a reasonable line of sight to the screen? Are you blocked? Or can everybody see? Okay, anybody got a problem with that? We see the screen? Okay. No.
Go ahead.
All right. This is what a traditional meter looks like for electricity. It's the analog meter. It's electromechanical in nature. It's not electronic. It's not digital. It has dials that slowly turn. Most of you are familiar with this. Now, the nature of these things is typically, because these meters must be manually read, they only provide the utility with the homeowner's total usage for the month. And many of us feel that should be enough. Why do they need to know more than that? That's what they need to bill us, our total monthly usage for the month. And we'll get into some of the reasons why they want more data. This is what one smart meter model looks like. This is the kind we're seeing over on the east side of the state with Detroit Edison. I didn't get a chance to cut in the photograph of your GE meter, but some of you during intermission want to take a look. It looks as though one of the consumers folks brought an actual model of the meter.
That's the real one. Yep.
Okay.
That's the real deal.
So maybe some of you want to take a look at that. It's a GE meter that's on the table over there on the sidewall. Okay, the thing about the smart meter is you no longer have that big wheel turning, you no longer have the clock dials. What you have is an electronic, you have the electronic display here. That display actually usually cycles through 2 or 3 different numbers. The kinds that we have that are made by Itron over on the east side cycles through 3 different numbers. One of them, I believe, is an identification number for the meter. One of them is your meter reading, and I've forgotten what the third one is, but they cycle through rather rapidly. Some folks have had some difficulty reading their own meter because the numbers flip through rapidly and they're not sure which one is the meter reading. But there is information on, at least on DTE's website, on how to read the meters, and probably Consumers has something. Do you have something like that on yours too, Mr. McGee?
I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about.
Okay, is there something on the Consumers website that explains to people how to read their own meter?
No? We read the meter, the new meters.
Okay.
Unless you're talking about the old analog meters.
Yeah.
No, there's no need with the new
Okay.
meters.
That has been one of the complaints we've had over on the east side, is people are frustrated that they can't read it and they have to take the company's word for the reading because they have no way of cross-checking it. Functions of the meter, of the smart meter. What it can do, it measures, and it can store in its memory a lot of detailed information about your usage, and then it can transmit that information, usually by radio waves, although there are other ways. There's what's called power line carrier, where the signals go right through the power lines. There's the possibility, at least, of doing it through fiber optics, but I don't know of any company that's doing it that way in the United States right now. They do it that way over in Italy. And what this does is it can show the utility how much electricity you're using each and every hour of the day. How much electricity did you use between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning, for instance? That tends to create information about your lifestyle, your habits, your routines, when you get up in the morning, when you make meals, when you leave the house to go to work, when you've left the house for a vacation. All these kind of things can be discerned from the data that comes off that meter. It could also be done with a hardwired internet connection, but I haven't heard of too many utilities doing it that way. Mainly because I guess broadband internet isn't widely enough available, universally enough available to make that practical. Yeah. Yes.
Right now, it's actually for solar space for anyone else to come.
We have to turn them away.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to sit down and go ahead and let them know. Yes, one of them. I don't know how much
I've just been informed by the custodian that we are at capacity in this room, so more people show up. Unfortunately, we will have to turn them away.
Okay.
Maybe what we can do is have them sign our, we do have a sign-in thing on a clipboard by the door for mailing list, and if we do have to turn people away, if we can at least get their name. Somebody just arrived?
No, we're good.
Okay. If we get their email, we can email them information about the program. Okay. The meters use two-way communication, so the utility can send signals to the meter as well as receive signals from the meter. These smart meters have the ability to turn service on or off remotely when a bill has not been paid or at the time of a move-in or move-out. Saves trouble of sending somebody out to read the meter at move-in time. It can act or will act most likely in the future as a gateway for communication between the electric utility and individual appliances within your home. Now that would happen only after we get the next generation of appliances. They're calling those smart appliances, and they will have chips in them. Whirlpool Corporation announced a year or so back that beginning in 2014, they will make no appliance that is not a smart appliance. So your freedom to choose whether you want a smart appliance or not may be rapidly disappearing. Unless you want to keep on repairing your old appliances or buying used appliances, pretty soon your house is going to be full of smart appliances. These smart appliances will talk to the smart meter, and the utility will then gather still more information, more detailed and specific information about what exact appliances you're using. The question is that I want to focus on is, all this data collection really necessary? And what it reveals information about your lifestyle and heretofore private activities within the home. Let's just take them one by one. Let's look at some of the arguments that the utilities will give us as to why they need to collect all this data. First place, it's to encourage customers to conserve energy and to shift some of their energy demand to off-peak times of day. In that regard, I think I should say this. There's been a change in the whole attitude of how we approach electricity generation. Used to be, until fairly recent times, that people were encouraged to use as much electricity as they wanted. The more the merrier as far as the utility is concerned, because they're getting paid by the kilowatt hour. And what they would do is, if the demand outstripped the existing facilities, they would build more power plants. And that seemed to be working okay for a long time. But now we have all this concern with things like global warming and also a desire to become independent of Mideast oil, so we don't have to go fight wars to preserve our access to oil. For some of these reasons, there's a new way of looking at these things. And the new way of looking at it basically is we're going to work towards the goal of making the consumers, the utility customers, adjust their demand so that it will fit within the available supply, the existing supply. We're not going to build new power plants, at least not as rapidly as we used to. We're running into all sorts of problems with the coal-fired plants, the nuclear plants. There's objections to building most of these things. So we're going to try to damp down the demand to match the available supply. At least that's the thinking. Another word for that is rationing. So the idea of the smart meter is if we can show people in detail what they're using, where they could maybe go online and see their electric consumption broken down hour by hour, day by day. Maybe this will encourage them to see where they could economize, they could use a little less energy. Or, if we can get them to shift their demand to off-peak hours of the day. This is very important, and I can understand why the utilities want to do this, because the biggest problem when it comes to matching demand and supply is during the times of peak load, like in the summertime, during the peak air conditioning hours, from perhaps the middle of the afternoon through 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. A lot of demand for air conditioning, a lot of electric demand at those hours. Much less during the night, less during the morning than there is in the afternoon and early evening. Now, the number of power plants that they have to build to meet all this demand is determined pretty much by the peak load. At other times of the day, they have no problem meeting the demand. In fact, they can run their most efficient generators at other times of the day. They don't, but to meet the peak demand, they may have to fire up plants that are less efficient, that give less kilowatt hours per barrel of oil burned or whatever. And so it's less efficient, it costs the utility more to provide that electricity during peak hours. And there's a danger that will exceed the available capacity, and they're pretty much blocked from building new plants. So those are some of the goals. Now the idea is the customer can see his usage by going online through their internet to their account with a password. They can see their usage. Or there may be displays that could be mounted in the home that you could have on your coffee table or mounted on a wall or whatever that would show you that information. Okay, so the question is, do smart meters really conserve energy? And the answer from everything that we're learning is no. Only the customer, the meter doesn't conserve any energy whatsoever in itself. Only the customer can do that, only by changing their lifestyle. No study that we know of to date has shown real evidence that customers change their behavior because a smart meter was installed. Most people are too busy to look at the data or make use of the information. Or they can't change their consumption patterns. You know, if they're on a certain schedule because of their work hours, that's going to determine when they're going to have to use the most electricity. There was a pilot program done by Detroit Edison and a few years back where they went into a couple areas, Grosse Ile and Harson's Island, to do a small-scale experiment, putting in smart meters to see whether it would change people's behavior. Well, they got the network working okay, but they never proved that it changed behavior, or at least not changed behavior enough to cover the cost of the meters. And then with the Michigan Public Service Commission, they were supposed to see a cost-benefit study done on those pilots. But the pilot cost-benefit studies were never done. Nevertheless, our dear Michigan Public Service Commission authorized mass deployment of smart meters, even though the pilot program did not show an economic benefit for the customers. As a result of that, Michigan's Attorney General, Cox at the time, began a lawsuit against the Public Service Commission, arguing that it was inappropriate for them to authorize mass deployment when there had been no cost-benefit study. He says it's not fair to the utility customers because the cost of all this is going to be passed along to the customer. Not fair to make the customer bear these costs if you can't prove that you're saving energy. That case went to the Michigan Court of Appeals last April, nearly a year ago. The Court of Appeals sided with the Attorney General and said, right, they did not do the cost-benefit study. They had no justifiable legal basis for authorizing the mass deployments. Now, the Court of Appeals didn't stop the mass deployments, but they kicked it back to the Public Service Commission, and they said, you guys are going to have to take another look at this. You're going to have to redo that whole rate case where you awarded them rate increase for the smart meters. You're going to have to look at that, and you're going to have to prove by proper evidence on the record that these things are cost justified. Now, if they can't successfully complete that, the court will probably step in again and put a stop to the program. But the odds are the Michigan Public Service Commission will find a way to cost justify the program, because it's a pet program that they want to push. Now let's look at some of the other reasons why utilities say that they need all this detailed data about our household use. One of the reasons is something called time of use pricing. This means that they would be charging their customers more when electricity is used during hours of peak demand. Just to pull some numbers out of the air, maybe they're going to charge you 20 cents or 30 cents a kilowatt hour if you use electricity for your air conditioning during the hottest part of the day. But maybe all during the night, they're only going to charge you 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So there would be some incentives if you are able to make the shift. If you're willing to do your laundry in the middle of the night, for example, you could save some money. Okay, it's supposed to provide incentive to shift demand. Does it work? No, does not work, from what we've seen so far in these studies. The pilot study did not show enough change of behavior to cover the cost of the meters. And we're not aware of any study that did show such results. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say maybe there's a way to make those incentives work. Maybe they didn't do it exactly right. Maybe some way can be found to make the incentives work. Does that mean we need smart meters? No, I would say all that would be needed is dual register meters that accumulate peak time usage in one register and off-peak usage in the other. It might look something like this. What we're seeing on the upper one is the peak hours usage. Okay, I better get back on the mic. On the upper one, we're seeing the peak hours usage, where it says 029874. That's cumulative year-to-date or since the meter was installed usage. This is electricity that was used during peak hours. The second register down below is the usage in off-peak hours. It could do this with a mechanical meter with 2 separate counters if they wanted to. I'm sure somebody could design such a meter. Or they could do it with an electronic digital meter with 2 separate counters. They don't need to know everything you did at every different hour of the day. All they need to know is your total usage during peak hours and your total usage during off-peak hours for billing purposes. Then they charge you the higher rate for the peak hour usage and the lower rate for the other. That could implement time to use billing. But no, they're not going to do it that way. They're going to do it in a way that maximally violates your privacy. Okay, let's look at some other things. Why else do they want the smart meters? Okay, one reason is to eliminate the cost of the meter readers. Now, in the long run, that's probably a good thing. Anytime we can make something less labor intensive and more automated, there are benefits. In theory, it should make it possible for them to give us electricity cheaper than if they had to continue paying the meter readers. But there's a way to do that too, without invading our privacy or exposing us to all the electromagnetic radiation that's now in the offing. And that's the AMR system, which stands for Automated Meter Reading. Systems like that have been around for quite a while. It's where you have a drive-by vehicle. It could be a car, a truck. Goes down a residential street. It sends out a signal, a radio beep signal. It's an interrogation signal. It says, okay, meters, all your meters on the street, give me your readings. And when they hear that interrogation signal, they all answer back and give their readings. And this is an activity that would occur once a month, and they get your monthly readings from everybody on the street. All within a matter of seconds. Move on to the next street. Nobody has to get out of the car, the truck, and get into somebody's backyard and get bitten by the dog or anything. You know, it's very automatic. I tend to like that system for that reason. Okay, now there's another argument for the smart meters, and that is that they're needed to promptly report power outages. Utilities want to be alerted to power outages and be able to dispatch service personnel quickly to correct these. Okay, and that is important. Let's say you have a storm. A big storm blows through. A lot of tree branches and limbs come down. Wires are brought down. Or it could be as a result of ice, over wires getting heavily laden with ice. Storm like that, the utility has a real struggle to get everybody's power restored. And what can happen is that the utility linemen, they think they restored power in a neighborhood. You know, they fixed whatever the main problem was in the neighborhood. And they leave, and they go on to the next neighborhood, and then they get a call that so-and-so still doesn't have their power. And they got to go back to the neighborhood where they thought they were done, because there was also drop wires from the pole to somebody's house that got brought down. So it would eliminate problems like that. They have instant information about which houses still don't have power. That's a benefit. But that could be done without smart meters. All you need is a little radio transmitter, battery powered, that would only transmit when there's an outage. Okay, who pays? We all do. We're paying partly through federal taxes, and partly the rest of it is passed through on our utility bills. The utility companies are allowed to recoup their capital investments plus a return on their capital investments. So they're not going to eat these costs, they're going to pass them along. Where are these being installed? All over the world. Now this is an interesting point, because if you look at that map and you see all those, everywhere you see one of the little red circles, I don't know if you can see the letters in it, but it says AMI, which is Automated Metering Interface. Every one of those little red circles is where they got smart meters. And you see they're all over the United States, all through Europe, parts of the Mideast, South Africa, South America, and China, which doesn't happen to show on this map, China and Japan. So basically all the industrialized areas of the world are heavily populated with these things now. And when did it start? It all started less than 10 years ago. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why? How does it happen that every industrialized country in the world is doing this all at the same time? Does nobody sit back and say, well, Belgium is doing this or France is doing this, why don't we wait and see how it works out there before we start doing it? No, nobody's waiting to see how it works in another country. They're all doing it simultaneously. So you've got to assume that there's some common factor that's driving all this. And I'll get to that in a minute. So why are these meters controversial? Well, first of all, it is the invasion of privacy. Our Fourth Amendment rights are being violated. I hope you all know what the Fourth Amendment is. It says that we are to be secure in our homes against unreasonable searches and seizures. Police, law enforcement authorities are required to get a warrant before they come into our house, except under very limited special circumstances. And that is the Fourth Amendment, and this would seem to be a clear breach of it, because the utilities, at the instigation of our government, are now reaching into our homes to extract data, which will then be turned over to the government. But the government says, no, we didn't do that. We didn't come into your house, the utility did that. But we're making the utility do that, and then we're going to get the fruits of it. We're going to get the data. So it seems to be a Fourth Amendment issue. Health. Electrosensitive people become sick almost immediately. Now let me say a word or two about that. An electrosensitive person is a person who, when exposed to certain kinds of radio waves in the microwave range, these are the kind of radio waves that are given off by microwave ovens, by cell phones, by smart meters, and a few other devices, garage door openers, I think. This type of radiation will make some people sick. Now, they're a minority, okay? They're a very small minority. Variously estimated to be maybe 3% of the public, possibly as much as 15%, but it's probably more between 3% and 10% of the public that is electrosensitive. What happens to those people when they're exposed to these things? Well, they get headaches, they get nausea, they get brain fog where they have trouble concentrating, they get heart palpitations, they can't sleep at night. Now, this is not hypothetical, this is very, very real, and I personally know a number of people who were not able to sleep in their homes after a smart meter was installed. Some of them were sleeping in their cars, some of them were sleeping in tents in their backyard, they're sleeping at houses of friends or relatives. They cannot sleep in their own home once the smart meter's on. But again, this is not the majority of people, this is a small minority. And so you might say, well, you know, why should we trouble ourselves about a small small fraction of the public that's got a problem with this. Most of us don't seem to have that reaction. Overwhelming majority of the public does not get any of these symptoms when a smart meter is installed. So why should we worry about these people? Well, I could hit that on two levels. On one level, you could say, well, why don't we treat this as just another kind of handicap? We do try to accommodate handicapped people in our society. You know, we have handicapped parking spots, we have curb cuts, a lot of things we do to make it possible for the handicapped among us to lead a more or less fully functional life, to be able to hold a job, to be able to go out shopping, to be able to do a lot of things. Well, that's one reason, but there's another reason. It's what I call the canary in the mine argument. I presume a lot of you are familiar with the expression canary in the mine, but I'll spell it out anyways for anybody that maybe doesn't know. Miners have a long-standing tradition. I'm thinking particularly of coal mining. They have a long-standing tradition that one of the risks that they're exposed to is that too much methane gas will accumulate in the mining tunnels, or too much coal dust in the air. Either of those things can cause violent explosions. Or before that even, it can cause them to pass out, to become unconscious. And what they found is that canary is very sensitive to this. So they bring a canary into the mine. If the canary dies, they know they got big trouble and they better get out of there. So what I'm suggesting here is maybe we would listen to the handicapped among us, or the electrosensitive handicapped among us. Because if they get these immediate symptoms, maybe that's just the first wave. And we're all going to be at some risk in the longer run. For the rest of us, the majority of us, we may not see symptoms for 15, 20 years. But that's, you know, we went all through this with cigarettes. For a long time, the industry said, oh no, there's no danger here. There's no credible scientific studies that show that smoking is harming your health. And this went on decade after decade after decade until finally they were brought to account for it. This may be the case. 15, 20 years from now, we're going to have people with cancer, neurological illnesses like Parkinson's disease, but it'll be too late. The exposure would have occurred long before the symptoms. But if we listen to the electrosensitive among us, that's our canary in the mine. That should be our warning sign that if it's doing such bad things to them, it must be doing bad to us too, only it's below the threshold of our perception at this point. Now, another reason that smart meters are controversial is because they can cause interference with medical devices like pacemakers and implants. We know one story, at least, where somebody has died as a result of that. But admittedly, it's only one story and it's purely anecdotal. But we have anecdotal accounts from all over the country of people who are having symptoms. They're having heart palpitations. In some cases, the pacemakers have failed temporarily after a smart meter was installed. Now, why would that happen? Well, the kind of power that we're used to in this country, and which we've enjoyed for most of the last 100 years, is 60 cycle, it's called sinusoidal current, that big green thing that goes up and down and then up again. That's the 60 cycle, that is the 60 cycle frequency of our power. And that's the only thing that's supposed to be traveling on the wiring through our homes and businesses, is that 60 cycle. But what's happened in more recent years, we're getting a lot of noise superimposed on that. All that red stuff is high frequency noise that is also traveling on the wiring through our homes and businesses. And there are many sources for that. It's not just smart meters, but a lot of the devices we use, computers, television sets, a lot of electronic things that are in the home can contribute to that noise. But smart meters are adding another whole layer of noise on top of whatever was there before. And there comes a point where the cumulative exposure is too much. How are you exposed to this? It travels to the wiring, so you're standing near a light switch, or you're standing near your television set. And now these are not radio frequencies, these are way below radio frequency. They're typically multiples of 60 cycles, like 120 cycles, 240 cycles, 480 cycles. These are called harmonics. These are traveling through your wire. You stand near a light switch or an appliance, and that is generating an electromagnetic field into the room where you're standing. And it can induce tiny microscopic currents in your body. Your body may or may not be able to handle that. We are electrical beings. Our bodies depend on sending electrical signals from one part of the body to another, like from the brain to the heart, for example, to tell the heart when to speed up or slow down. All kind of electrical signals crisscrossing through our body. Now, the biologists know the frequencies of these, and they worry that if we get harmonic frequencies, like these red things in here, that happen to be the wrong frequency, they could confuse the body's systems. So it's a risk factor. What we find, practically speaking, is that when smart meters installed, the electrosensitive people, they have symptoms in part because of the radio broadcasting from the meters, but also because of this dirty electricity that the meters generate. Okay. Now, this has also been known to damage household appliances. We've had reports of refrigerator motors burning out, expensive high-end stereo equipment being destroyed. Another problem is it makes the whole grid vulnerable to hackers and terrorists. You know, I mean, think about it. And what I'm about to tell you, I'm quoting, almost quoting, from the retired director of our Central Intelligence Agency. He said in an interview with ABC News, I'm going to paraphrase it, I'm speaking just from memory, but he said, imagine this, he says, they're going to give you a world in the future where you're driving to work and you remember you forgot to turn off the air conditioner in your home. You're going to be able to use your cell phone, dial up your own home system, and turn off your air conditioner remotely. He went on to say, and this was Woolsey, by the way, former CIA director, he went on to say, if you can do that, so can some guy in Shanghai. He can dial in with his cell phone to your home and turn off your air conditioner, or worse. We are creating a grid that is going to be intimately interwoven with the internet, the smart grid. People will be able to, the potentiality exists that hackers could bring down the entire network, or that they could selectively bring down particular houses, particular neighborhoods, particular cities. All of these things are possible because all the meters have disconnect switches in them that will shut off all power to your house. They can be remotely triggered. If they know the right codes and the right passwords, they can do this. Why would we want to be vulnerable like that? Our old-fashioned, our old dumb grid, no hacker could do that. I mean, without physically getting into substations and doing some heavy vandalism, they could not bring down our grid with a smartphone. Another thing is the risk of house fires. I'm just going to mention this in passing. It's not one of my major points, but you probably should know about it. This is a picture of a house fire caused by a smart meter. That's the meter on the side of the house. Caught fire, and it's going to cause the whole side of the house to go up in flames. I think that particular shot was out of Australia. Here's another shot. This is a picture of a smart meter that melted down from a fire. You can see that it liquefied. They were using clear black plastic rather than glass for the meter cover. That's why it melted the way it did. I don't want to make too much of this because these are growing pains in the industry. These are transitional problems. Eventually the industry will get it right. They're having some problems because they're rushing all these things out. Sometimes the meters haven't been tested as thoroughly as they should be. Some of the installers have not been trained as well as they should be. And they come out. We've heard stories that some of the installers out there are only getting an hour or two of training over on the east side of the state. Now, maybe consumers are doing it better than that, I don't know. But over on our side, an hour or two of training they get. They come out there, they jerk the old meter out, they shove in the new meter into the meter socket. Now, if they don't get it seated properly, then there's going to be arcing in there and the potential to start a fire. Another problem is that they don't want to bother knocking on the door and warning you that they're going to briefly interrupt the power. A lot of times people aren't home, they just don't want to be bothered. They just pull one meter out and slap the other one in. Well, that may interrupt some delicate piece of equipment or even medical equipment that's running inside the house. So there's things being done wrong because this is all being rushed. But those are temporary problems. Eventually they'll figure out the solution so we don't get fires. Now, how did all this get started? We have to go back to the Rio Environmental Conference in 1992. There was a document proposed there, and this conference was about dealing with global warming and greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. There was a document proposed called Agenda 21. It was later adopted by the United Nations under the official name Agenda for the 21st Century. Now, many, if not most, of the industrial countries are committed to this. The first President Bush, George H. Walker Bush, informally committed this nation to this program. And he was able to do this without any confirmation by the United States Senate because it's not a treaty, it was just an informal commitment. Yet he began to implement it by issuing executive orders and so forth. Then we had 3 successive U.S. presidents continuing this informal commitment that the first President Bush made. Well, we had the Clinton administration. They continued the programs. Then we had the second President Bush, and then we had President Obama. They've all continued it. In 2005, and I guess that would have been under the second President Bush, Congress passed something called the Energy Policy Act. Stated purpose is to reduce our carbon footprint. Not a bad idea. And one of the things mentioned was that we should work towards developing a smart grid, smart meters, and so forth, was mentioned. It was all to be voluntary. It wasn't to be forced down anyone's throat. Federal law said it would be voluntary. 2007, Congress passed the Energy Independence Act. Purpose to reduce our dependence on the East oil. Another laudable purpose. Again, to be voluntary. People were supposed to have a choice to accept a smart meter or not. It was supposed to be done by persuasion. 2009, Congress passes the stimulus bill, Obama's stimulus bill. Included $3.5 billion to promote, quote, smart grid initiatives. That's turned out to mean mostly the smart meters. They've done very little else. It's primarily just smart meters. Well, the utilities all over the country, they rushed smart meter programs as fast as they could in order to get their share of that $3.5 billion. In Michigan, there was the 2 pilot programs, Detroit Edison did. I alluded to that before. No cost-benefit studies were done at the end of those pilot programs. 2010, Michigan Public Service Commission authorized mass deployments. Then they could charge, actually what they authorize is that if the utilities deploy these things, they can charge the cost back to your customers. Attorney General Mike Cox sues over that. He wins in the Court of Appeals. Meanwhile, Detroit Edison is doing a massive rollout in Oakland County and Detroit. These installations under Detroit Edison were all forced, absolutely coercive. In the beginning, everyone is told they had no choice. They must accept the smart meter or their electrical power would be terminated. Detroit Edison did not have a mandate from that, from the state of Michigan or from the Public Service Commission. They did this on their own, and they said, this is how we're going to distribute electricity from now on. You want to take electric service from us, you must accept the smart meter. Nobody is allowed to opt out. They've said that over and over again. No one will be allowed to opt out for any reason. Well, they weren't able to sustain that position. We started going around. I was one of about 6 or 7 people that started going around from city council to city council, pleading with city councils to please pass a resolution putting your city on a record as being against this coercive forcing of meters on people. Let people have an opt-out if they want an opt-out. And please, and also the resolutions that these cities pass, call upon our Public Service Commission to investigate the health impacts on the public in general, too. Not just for the opt-out people, but on everybody. So when we got 9 cities to pass the resolutions. At that point, the Public Service Commission woke up and took notice. Generally speaking, they tend to be on the side of the industry they regulate. They're generally on the side of the utilities. They have tended to be tone deaf to what is in the public's interest. But that's why we had to go around the city councils, because we needed a way to put some pressure on the Public Service Commission. That's how we did it. So in, I believe it was January of 2012, they opened a 6-month-long investigation. We knew it would be a farce from the beginning, and on June 29th, they issued their final report, and they said, we have determined, based on our studies and investigation, that the health effects of the smart meters are inconsequential. That was their word, inconsequential. Now, people have raised concerns about the privacy. We think those may be valid concerns that should be addressed in future years. Utilities need to keep a close watch on it, make sure they're encrypting the data, and so on and so forth. But no challenge to whether the utilities ought to even be allowed to collect the information. No challenge to that. Then, of course, in April, we had that appeals court ruling that said, go back and do it over. So what I want to get to is, what is the real reason for this worldwide push? We think it's about controlling people and how they can use energy in their homes and businesses. I spoke before about how they don't want to build power plants to keep up with their demand. Well, what's the alternative? They ration us. They limit how much electricity we can use. Or maybe they even tell us for what purposes we may use electricity. We can use it for this and not for that. They'll have all the data they need to promulgate rules and regulations for us as to how we may or may not use electricity, how much we may use. Then they can, if we violate the rules and we use electricity more than we're supposed to, or at the wrong time of day, or to run the wrong appliances, they can then impose a sanction. They can cut off our power for a period of time. This has been done in some of the western states. They have meters, they have a program where they will interrupt your power for a period of time, like 15 or 20 minutes. Because that's basically to punish you for having violated the rules about how much electricity you can use and for what purposes. Now, no utility in Michigan has said they're going to do that yet. I haven't heard Detroit Edison say it, I haven't heard consumers say it. But it's certainly a possibility down the road. It's the kind of thing that becomes possible because of the smart meters. The idea is, first you put in a detailed monitoring system, then you impose rationing. Well, you can't ration if you can't first monitor. Monitoring is the prelude or the prerequisite to control. Later we'll discuss what a small band of activists did. I've covered some of that already, but we'll get back to that towards the end of the evening. That's the end of our first presentation. Now,
David,
have a
thank you.
second speaker. And
Wait, I'm behind the post here. I just want to say one thing, and thank you very much. It does take a lot of strength to stand up to this, and frankly, it takes a lot of strength to be from the power company and be here. And we have to make some time to get some answers. But I would just like to add to this. Even my conservative and my real close friends look at me and they search sometimes for that tinfoil hat that they know must be under my thinning hair. The reality is that the federal government has determined how much water can be in your toilet when you flush. They're not above rationing. They're not above making it illegal to have a top-load washer for your clothing, or if anyone's bought a new dishwasher in the last 2 years, forcing you to buy dishwashers that refuse to wash dishes. So, yes, there may be some paranoia here, but it seems to me that there is a significant amount of evidence that certainly ought to take away or make us think twice when someone says, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." So. I wish that wasn't funny, you know. Anyway, so we're gonna go to this, and again we do have very brave local folks who do care about us, but the federal government's shutting down our power plant. And remember, this wasn't the House, this wasn't the Senate, this wasn't the Supreme Court. This was the EPA director who promulgated a rule that had to do with carbon emissions that made Consumers Energy be forced to shut down the power plant that is here in Muskegon County, not just creating an energy issue, but creating, as we've got some county commissioners and I'm sure we've got some city people here, creating a significant tax issue, tax revenue issue, and of course a significant number of jobs that are being lost too. So there are lots of things going on here that unless we get energized and motivated, we'll be done in an office, a big ritzy office, nicer than any offices that I've ever been in, that will just be waving wands, big wands, that are really going to affect
Okay,
us. So,
Jim, we need to move along.
yes, and I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our next speaker is Diana Osterman. Now, Diana has been 22 years in the communications industry. In the last 8 of those years, she was working for Lucent Technologies in the area of cell phone projects on the side of network communications, wireless network communications. She has a good deal of knowledge that she brings from that background to apply to the smart meter issue. Go ahead, Diana.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to be talking about our smart meter safes. I'm going to talk real quick about, because David covered a lot about what a smart meter is and does, but look specifically at the Consumers Energy Smart Grid as it's been announced in various press releases. Look at the electromagnetic spectrum and what kind of health effects that electromagnetic frequencies have, what the FCC is doing or not doing to regulate this, and then what all this means to you. So real quick about a smart meter, what's different from a digital meter. The big thing is two-way communication. You can change parameters remotely in the smart meter. You can change how often it's going to communicate. You can change how big a snapshot of time it's recording. And the meter can react to these commands. So it's this interactive two-way communication that's really at the core of what makes a smart meter smart. There's a lot more information collected. It's not just how often it's collected. They'll look at what is your peak draw in a given time period. It's not just how much in that snapshot of time. There's a number of different channels that are collecting information. So there's a variety of information that gets collected for each of these little snapshots, which is why it says so much about what your activities are at home. So the data is collected in snapshots of time, and new software can be remotely uploaded. It's not just changing parameters in the software they started with. They can totally change what these meters are doing by uploading new features into these meters. So what Consumers Energy has announced over time, they chose a company called SmartSync as their integrator or their general contractor back in 2011. And then in March of 2012, they announced the whole partnership. They were using the GE residential meters, Verizon as the public cellular network, and for anybody who's techie, CDMA was sort of the flavor of wireless that they're using. And this is instead of what's been called a mesh network, which is what DTE is using. It's a different way of having the meters communicate back to the main utility. So this is using, like a cell phone, going through the Verizon network to communicate the data as a text message, more or less. It's been compared to sending a text message. And then for the software and the networking, the radio communication, they were using GridNet, the company GridNet for the software, and Qualcomm for the networking, for the radios. Then in February of 2012, meter maker Itron bought SmartSync, but apparently their contract was already in place for GE meters, so even that announcement said that they're still staying with the GE meters, even though Itron now owns SmartSync and Itron is a meter maker. So then this installation began in August of 2012, but I've been hearing that they're going to be replacing the meters, and I've seen at least one reporter in an article say the speculation is they're going to go with the Itron meters because Itron now owns SmartSync, so why do they even want GE in the picture? So they might be changing out your meters to use an Itron meter. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about each of them because we're not sure what meter you're going to end up having. This is the diagram they have put out for, now I should say this is GridNet, but GridNet is the networking software that they're using. So you've got up in the upper left-hand corner, you've got the utility with sort of the core software that's collecting all the information. Going diagonally from the upper left to the lower right, you've got what they're calling IP networks. That's Internet Protocol. So that's internet communication going over the Verizon network, just as if you were going to get a hold of the internet through your smartphone. It's the same kind of idea. that all of these devices that David was talking about, all the appliances that are going to have radios, they're talking about having your car charger, having all kinds of different sensors and devices in the home, in addition to the smart meter, all have these little radio chips in it. They're all going to communicate, like sending text messages over the internet, over Verizon network, back to the core utility. So what they're starting with, the kind of capabilities they talk about, load profiling is one of the capabilities. Actually, they're not talking about it that much. Other utilities have talked about that capability. But this is this detailed information of what exactly you're doing in your home. That is a capability because they're capturing so much detailed information in little bites, little snapshots. David talked to you about time of use data. That's what TOU is, time of use. So there's that kind of data being collected. There's power quality data being collected. Is the amount of power they're sending out at the head end making it all the way to your house, or is there line loss in between and you've got a lower power quality at your house? So it'll be monitoring things like that. Demand response functions are some of these control things that we're talking about, that depending on what you're doing and what they want you to do in response, there's sort of this demand and response interplay where they're using the functionality that they have in the meters to make different things happen depending on what's happening in the use. They're capturing data initially in 1-hour snapshots, and I make the note, software changeable. Currently, you can go down to every 15 minutes that you can take a snapshot of 15 minutes of data instead of an hour. There's nothing that says with a software upload they couldn't make that 5 minutes or 1 minute or real time. That's just a software change. They transmit data initially 6 times per day, and it's been announced in the press, each one of those transmissions, 4 seconds long. Again, software changeable. It could be 20 times a day, it could be constant. It's whatever they want it to be. It's software driven. There's the piece of equipment called a service switch, and I call it optional because it's optional, but most utilities are electing to get it. This is the piece of equipment that David talked about that could actually turn off your power. The service switch is designed ostensibly to allow the utility to turn the service off if somebody moves out, or for non-bill payment, or somebody new moves in, and then they can remotely turn it on. So there's some good ideas behind the service switch, but the reality is once you can turn service off, you can turn it off for any reason. Or no reason. It could be a hacker, it could be terrorists. So it's designed for remote connect, disconnect, and prepayment type metering, but it can be used in a lot of other ways. So let's look a little bit closer at this remote connect disconnect switch, which has kind of developed over time a euphemism of a kill switch, because it's killing your power. So the utility can send a command to disconnect all service, ostensibly due to moves or bill non-payment. This next feature, software can be programmed to disconnect service automatically if usage threshold is exceeded. This is the rationing that David is talking about. Now, it's initially promoted, and I don't even know if consumers have even talked about this yet. Other utilities are doing this, and I've even seen their RFPs, their request for proposal. This functionality has been requested. The utilities want this. They want to be able to set a threshold that if you go beyond that usage, they just cut your power. This is automatic. This is software driven, no humans involved. It hits that threshold, your power's dead. You lose all power. Now, it's again in these other places presented as if you want to pay a little bit less for your energy and say we'll comply with using less and get a lower price in exchange for limiting our usage, and just in case we forget or whatever and go over, we allow you to set this threshold and shut us down. But it's there. It can be used for rationing. It's a capability in the connect-disconnect switch. There's also, in the RFP for other places, they ask for a penalty period. So once you have been disconnected, it stays off for a certain amount of time as punishment for going over your threshold. It's in an RFP, it's something utilities want to be able to do. Hackers can make use of this kill switch. If you can shut people down, all you need is a little keyboard or a hack in with a cell phone, and guess what? You can use the kill switch to shut off as many people as you want. There's another piece of equipment that's inherent in the way these smart meters work. It's called a switching mode power supply. SMPS. The main reason you have this in these devices is because power is coming in at 120 volts or 240 volts, and the little microelectronics inside the meter only need tiny little bits of power. They don't need that much power in order to run. So you need a translator to break down this high amount of voltage into the 2 to 10 volts that these little microelectronics need in order to measure your usage and do all this recording, to do those capabilities. These little devices also run on direct current, DC power. What's coming in is AC, alternating current. So that translation has to take place. This translation, anytime you're damping down the power, you start creating these electrical transients. As David had showed you, the red squiggles, you had the big curve that was the green line, and then you had the little red squiggles. This is why. This is what's causing some of your little red squiggles. You get spikes of high frequency transients or electromagnetic interference, EMI, and they travel along the building wiring, as David told you, and they're emanating out towards people. And they have been found to have negative health effects. It's been most commonly associated with things like childhood leukemia, but it's not good really for anybody. It results in interference with the other electrical equipment. Again, David talked to you, there's been instances of expensive equipment being burned out, or interference in that things aren't operating properly. And again, this is this electromagnetic interference. And it's not just machines that are bothered by this. Our bodies are electrical equipment as well. We have electrical communications in our bodies, and so our electrical signals are scrambled by this electromagnetic interference. So it's affecting people as well as machinery. In some places, there's an opt-out arrangement where they will give you a meter without the transmitting function, but that's not going to eliminate the switching mode power supply. It's part of how a meter functions. A smart meter must have the switching mode power supply, and the switching mode power supply, as they're currently designed, are causing this kind of electromagnetic interference. As David has talked about things that could change over time, if meter manufacturers wanted to eliminate this, they could put in filters that would filter this out, but that adds cost. So you know how business is, they look for the lowest cost way to do things. The lowest cost way is forget the filter. So the ones right now, to my knowledge, I don't know of any meters that have a filter in them. So an opt-out, the only kind of opt-out that's really going to help you is the analog meter. So what else do we know about what Consumers is doing based on what other utilities are doing and based on the announcements Consumers has put out? Meters are sending out many other messages besides just your measurements. This is electrical equipment, it's networking equipment. They have to sync up with other pieces of equipment in the network. So they're going to be sending up messages, error messages, status messages. They have to synchronize their timing. There's other messages going on besides the 6 times a day that they're getting a transmission about what your usage is. I honestly don't even know how often these other messages go out, but I'm making you aware there's other transmissions. It's not just 6 times a day. Another statement that's been made by various utility companies over the years, over these last several years, is that your smart meter is similar to a cell phone. It's like a cell phone on the side of your house, especially now that you've got Verizon being used as the communication network. But guess what? The cell phones are emitting electromagnetic radiation when they're idle. They're doing that for a couple of reasons. One of the things that they have to do is sync up with the tower, and a cell phone can be moving around, but even though a smart meter is going to be nailed up to the side of your house, the tower could break down, or the meter could break down. The tower needs to know the meter's there, the meter needs to know that the same tower it's used to talking is there. So there's sort of a, hello, are you there? I'm over here. There's sort of the sync up message that goes out periodically. So that kind of a message is going on. There's also a battery reserve capability. This is how a cell phone works, and there's no reason to believe that these radios that are built by the same company that builds cell phone radios are any different. The radios are looking to save power. They don't want to run your battery down any faster than they have to. So they kind of go down in idle mode to minimum capabilities. Part of minimum capabilities means the receiver's turned off. So the receiver has to wake up like every few seconds and go, did anybody call me? Did I hear anything? Is there a text message? Is there a call coming through? So it has to wake up briefly and listen and go, nope, nothing there. Okay, and it goes back to sleep. And then it wakes up and then it goes back to sleep. So you have this sort of on-off going on with a receiver. And again, that's the way cell phones work. I have every reason to believe that's the way these radios are going to work as well. One of the other interesting things that SmartSync has put out, and I've got at least 2 pieces of paper right with me now, different articles, where SmartSync said that the smart meters are transmitting at 4 times the power of a cell phone. Now that was advertised as, why would a utility want a cell phone carrier on their on the side of their, to be used in their meter when there are places where you get poor cell phone coverage? Well, their answer to poor cell phone coverage was more power. More power to boost the signal so it can make its way to a distant tower. So 4 times the power of a cell phone. And guess what? The World Health Organization, based on looking at cell phone power, had declared wireless transmissions a possible carcinogen. So this is 4 times a possible carcinogen. It's 4 times a cell phone. The SmartSync meters are using 850 and 900 megahertz frequencies. That's just to lead into looking at later about the electromagnetic frequencies. So what's coming? This is what's there today. And people can be lulled into a false sense of security by saying, well, it's 6 times a day. How bad is that? So, okay, it might be a little disruptive when it goes off, but it's only 6 times a day. Heck, that's better than mesh network that's going off all the time. Well, guess what? Qualcomm, who is one of the partners, their chipsets brag that they will enable more real-time exchanges of information to a new wave of smart devices and constant connectivity to ensure an ultra-fast, always-on connection on any device. Doesn't that sound like transmitting all the time? That's what it sounds like to me. GridNet, the software company that they're using, the state of all managed devices, and by state that means, is it on, is it off, is it active, is it broken, what state is it in at a given moment. The state of all managed devices is known at all times and connected in a more or less real-time network, talking to a central controller. Guess what? That's always on. That's always transmitting. And guess what? When you're always transmitting, you're always radiating this wireless radiation. So you've got all managed devices. Well, that's back to smart meter, thermostat, appliances, car charger. Now think about not just your smart meter being on all the time, but all your appliances on all the time. All of these radios on all the time. That's the long-range plan. That's what's being bragged about in the press. So when we're talking about this going out all the time, where is out? What are we talking about? Now, this is where I'm looking at 2 different meters. I'm looking at Itron because that's what we could end up with here with consumers. And the Itron smart meter, this is from an Electric Power Research Institute report in December of 2010, where they did some testing on Itron smart meters. And this is what the radiation pattern looks like. This is known as an omnidirectional antenna. It's going out all directions, like a circle, all the way around the antenna. Now, you will hear from utilities that, well, the metal back on the meter blocks the radiation. Well, there's a metal back on this meter. If you look at the gray in the center of both of those circles, that dark gray, the bottom box, that's the metal back. Does it look like there's radiation behind that metal back? Sure is. It's a little bit less. You see a divot, you see a little, check mark in there, and you will see by the color the intensity is less, but it's not non-existent. There is radiation behind the meter. That means if your bed is on the other side of the wall from the smart meter, you're radiating your head. If your baby's crib is on the other side of that smart meter, you're radiating your baby. Realize there is radiation coming through all the way around those meters. Now they will also say that the house wall is going to block it, and part of that December 2010 EPRI report said, well, if you have a stucco wall, it's going to reduce it by some order of magnitude. How many people in Michigan have stucco walls? Do you know what a stucco wall is made of? Wire mesh with all of this stucco stuck to wire mesh.